State of Wisconsin, Circuit Court, Manitowoc County, Branch 1. State of Wisconsin, Plaintiff versus Stephen A. Avery, Defendant. Motion hearings, case number 05-CF381. Date July 19, 2006. Before the Honorable Patrick L. Willis, Circuit Court Judge. Appearances, Ken Kratz, Thomas Fallon, both special prosecutors on behalf of the state of Wisconsin. Dean Strang, Jerome Buting, attorneys at law. Stephen Avery, defendant, appears in person. Witnesses in this motion: Emily Matesic, Jennifer Colbus, Lieutenant John Byrnes, Investigator Mark Wiegert, Pamela Stern. Court. At this time, the court calls State of Wisconsin versus Stephen Avery. Its case number is 05381. We are here this morning to take evidence on some of the pretrial motions that have been filed. Will parties state their appearances for the record, please? Attorney Kratz. State appears by Calumet County District Attorney Ken Kratz, appearing as special prosecutor. Also appearing for the state is Tom Fallon from the Department of Justice. Attorney Buting. Buting and Williams by Attorney Jerome Buting, appearing on behalf of Mr. Avery. Also present, Attorney Dean Strang. The court. All right, we did meet in chambers briefly before beginning today. I believe the parties agreed that the first evidence to be presented would be on the defense motion to suppress statements made to the media, and the state was going to begin. Mr. Fallon, are you going to be handling this portion? Attorney Fallon. Yes, Your Honor. I will be conducting the evidentiary portion and argument, if any, relative to this issue. The court. All right, you may call your first witness. Attorney Fallon. The state would call Emily Matesic. Attorney Buting. Judge, could we just ask for a sequestration order of any other witnesses that are anticipated? The court. Are there any? Attorney Fallon. There is one other media person who I have not had an opportunity to talk to, who interviewed the defendant on two entirely different occasions. Attorney Strang. And then there's the jail administrator. Attorney Fallon. And there's the jail administrator. Attorney Strang. To Calumet County, who should be sequestered. The court. All right. Any objection to having those folks excluded from the courtroom? Attorney Fallon. No, I have no objection. Mr. Colbus, I guess you will have to step out. And Mr. Byrnes. Very good. Attorney Strang. Before we begin with Ms. Matesic, I'm informed by counsel that she's provided some documents today, two of which I think we should get copied. Attorney Fallon. That's correct. The witness did provide some additional information, and I have asked one of our assistants to make a couple of copies. So it will just be another minute or two before those copies appear. They're very short, 2 or 3 pages apiece, so it will just be another minute or two, and counsel will have those. The court. Okay, the clerk can swear the witness at this time. Emily Matesic, called as witness, herein having first been duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. The clerk. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record. The witness. Emily Matesic, Matesic. The court. Mr. Strang, do you object to question beginning? Attorney Strang. No. On the understanding, I will have these in a couple of minutes. We can go ahead. Attorney Fallon. All right. Very well. Re-examination by Attorney Fallon. What do you do for a living? I'm a television news reporter. And for whom are you a reporter? WBay-TV. How long have you been a reporter for that entity? Almost 11 months. All right. And are you currently assigned to any particular duties as a reporter with that news outlet? Just a general assignment reporter. All right. And specifically then, directing your attention to November 2005, did you have an opportunity to interview the defendant, in this case, Stephen Avery? Yes. And first of all, would you describe for us how it came to be that you interviewed Mr. Avery? In other words, how did it start? Which interview? I'm talking about the first interview on November 12th. In fact, that's a good question. So let me ask you this. How many times did you interview Mr. Avery? A couple. Twice. All right. And what format was he interviewed? The first one was in person on camera, and the second was over the phone. All right. And so the focus of our hearing today, so it's clear in your mind, would be for the first interview, which was on camera. All right. With respect to that particular interview, do you recall when that occurred? I believe it was November 12th. Tell us how it happened. The case had been going on for a couple of weeks, and I was with some coworkers on the night of the 11th, and we were just kind of talking about everything that day. There had been a news conference that Stephen Avery would be charged with Teresa Halbach's murder the following week. And we were just sitting around talking about it, and he had been talking to the media throughout this whole investigation, and so I got in to work on Saturday morning and called the Calumet County Jail to see if he would be willing to do an interview with us. Tell us about that call. I called the jail and told whoever answered on the phone who I was and what I was interested in, and asked if Stephen Avery would be interested in doing an interview with us. And they said, "Hold on, we'll go ask him." Put me on hold. A couple of minutes later, came back and he said, "Yes, he will talk to you." And was there any other instructions or any other feedback or comments from the administrator at the jail or whomever it was that you spoke to? Any other instructions or comments or requests? No. All right. Attorney Strain, I'm going to object. Move to strike the prior question or at least the answer as inadmissible hearsay as to the person on the phone. Attorney Fallon, I would object for two reasons. One, I don't believe that evidentiary rules are applicable in terms of a motion in line like this to determine the admissibility of evidence. And number two, it does have a substantial, quote, effect on the listener, close quote, as to the course of conduct to be embarked upon. So under either theory, this statement would be admissible. Attorney String, well, I think under 911.01, the rules of evidence do govern this proceeding, one, and two, clearly this representation of what Mr. Avery said is offered as truth here, not just for the state of mind of Ms. Matesic, which wouldn't be relevant anyway. The court, okay, your objection is going now to which question and answer? Attorney Strain, what happens when she's talking to the administrator, leaving the phone and coming back and purportedly relaying Mr. Avery's statement? So we have two levels of hearsay there. This would be admissible under 908.01, but the person on the phone is an inadmissible level of hearsay and it's offered for its truth. The court, I think it's acceptable to at least explain why she came to the interview, so I'm going to allow it. Attorney Fallon, thank you. Attorney Fallon, after this conversation, what did you do? My photographer and I got in the car and drove to the Calumet County Jail. All right, what occurred when you arrived at the jail? We signed in at the front desk and they said, "We'll take you into the room and we'll let you get set up and then we'll bring Mr. Avery in." All right, and describe the room for us. Very small room. There's just a small table and either two or three chairs. All right, how many doors in that room? There are two doors. Any windows to the room? Both doors had windows. All right, and in terms of the walls, any windows there? No. All right, who arrived in the room first, you and your cameraman or Mr. Avery? Mr. Avery was sitting in there when we walked in. All right, when he was sitting there, was there any conversation that you recall between yourself and Mr. Avery prior to going on camera? I think it was just small talk, hello, that sort of thing. All right, in your meeting with Mr. Avery at that time, did he give you any indication whatsoever that he did not want to participate in such an interview? No. As you recall now, thinking back on that moment, can you describe his demeanor for us? He was just relaxed, just kind of sitting there. All right. Who else was in the room? My photographer. were there any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department in the room with you as you were sitting up to conduct this interview? I believe there was in there when they walked us in. I don't remember how long they were in there while we were setting up. All right, during the course of the interview itself, was there any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department present? No. All right. In terms of the windows that you had previously described in the door, were there any members of the Sheriff's Department posted outside the door? Yes. All right. Which door or both doors? I believe there were both doors. One was behind me, so I couldn't see that one. Right. All right. Prior to engaging in discussion with Mr. Avery, did you or your cameraman, and that being him in your presence, have any discussions with any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department regarding the nature of your interview? No. Did you have any discussions with them with respect to what topics will be covered in the interview? No. Did they suggest any questions to ask Mr. Avery during the course of the interview? No. Your best estimate, approximately how long did the interview of the defendant take? We were probably there between 20 and 30 minutes. All right. Were you given any instructions as to how to conduct the interview or for length of the interview by members of the Sheriff's Department? In terms of when I say conduct, I mean, for instance, turning the camera on, turning the camera off, positioning of the person, or anything like that? No. All right. And in terms of the length, was that regulated at all by members of the Sheriff's Department? No. All right. Now, Ms. Matesic, this morning, immediately prior to going on the record, my assistant provided us with some documents that you brought along. I'd like to have you just identify them for purposes of the record. Attorney Fallon, if I may approach the witness and have the exhibit marked. The court, yes. The clerk can mark the exhibit. Attorney Fallon, thank you. Exhibit 1, 2, and 3 marked for identification. By Attorney Fallon. Ms. Matesic, I'm showing you what has been marked for identification purposes for this hearing as exhibit number 1. First of all, we'll start with that. What is exhibit number 1? It's a VHS copy of 5 stories, I think. Yeah, 5 stories involving interviews that I did with Mr. Avery. All right. And with respect to those interviews, is at issue today. The November 12th interview, is there a videotape of that particular interview? Yes. Not of the interview, of the stories that aired on our station. Just of the stories that aired? Correct. Very well. All right. And as far as you know, as the stories aired, is this true and an accurate video recording of those stories that were aired relative to your interviews with Mr. Avery? Yes. Very good. With respect to exhibits 2 and 3, could you identify these documents for us, please? Those are the scripts from the 2 interviews, or the 2 stories that I did on the 12th. Okay, and scripts, would it be fair to say the scripts are what you use for purposes of broadcasting a story? Yes. And likewise, these do not contain the full content of the interview with Mr. Avery relative to November 12th. No. Okay, so there are media broadcast accounts. Correct. Very good. Thank you. As far as exhibits 2 and 3, are they true and accurate scripts relative to the broadcast of the story relative to the interviews on November 12th? Yes. Very well. Thank you. Attorney Fallon, subject to counsel's cross, would move to introduce of those exhibits. Attorney Strain, I have no objection to 1, 2, or 3. The court, all right. Exhibits 1, 2, and 3 are admitted. By Attorney Fallon, what occurred upon your conclusion of the interview? We finished up the interview. I thanked Mr. Avery for talking to us. At that point, a deputy from the jail had come back into the room because we were finished, and I said, can I leave him my card? And the deputy said, I can take it. I couldn't actually give it to Mr. Avery. All right. And at any point during I think you said 20 to perhaps 30 minutes that you spent with him, at any time during that particular interview, did Mr. Avery express to you that he did not wish to participate in the interview? No. How would you characterize his willingness to participate in an interview which was on camera? He continued to answer my que- He continued to ask my questions. I'm sorry. He continued to answer my questions. All right. Prior to beginning the interview, did you explain to Mr. Avery what the nature or the purpose of your coming in to interview him was? I don't really recall. All right. How did the interview begin? What did you tell him in terms of why you were there, perhaps? I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I just said, I don't know if you're aware, but they announced you were going to be charged with Teresa Halbach's murder, and we just sort of started the interview. All right. Do you recall at this particular time the general framework of any of the questions that you asked him? In terms of leading him into an interview, do you remember how it started? I don't. Do you have any specific recollection as to whether, well, let me rephrase that question. Was it made clear to Mr. Avery that the interview was likely to be broadcast or parts of the interview would be broadcast on television? I don't think I ever said anything like that, but I guess you assume when you go in with a camera and a microphone that you're eventually going to use an interview for a story. Did you identify yourself to him? Yes. And how did you identify yourself to him? Do you recall? I said, I'm Emily Matesic from Channel 7 or Channel 2. And he said, and did he seem to recognize either who you were or perhaps your news station? That I don't recall. Okay, at any point during this interview, did he ask that the camera be turned off? No. At any point in the interview, did he refuse to answer any of your questions? No. Attorney Fallon, I will pass the witness. The court. Mr. Strang. Cross-examination by Attorney Strang. Ms. Matesic, if I understood you correctly, you began working at W-Bay in August of 2005. Correct. You previously had not worked in Wisconsin. No. The very first time you heard the name Stephen Avery would have been shortly after November 3rd, 2005. That I don't recall. First time you heard the name Stephen Avery was in connection with Teresa Halbach's disappearance? I believe so. You were assigned to that story as a general assignment reporter? Yes. You explained to Mr. Fallon on direct examination that your belief that on November 11th, when you were chatting with one or more of your coworkers, whatever it was, that the case had been going on for a couple of weeks, and that at that point, do you recall that? Yes. By that, you mean the public awareness of the disappearance of Teresa Halbach? Yes. Mr. Avery himself was under arrest, you knew, by November 11th. Correct. You have been following the news conferences that Mr. Kratz and Sheriff Poggle principally had been holding? Yes. Had you attended those? A few of them. Not all of them, but some of them you had attended personally. Yes. You had introduced yourself to Sheriff Poggle at some point? I believe. Yes. Sure. You introduced yourself to Mr. Kratz at some point before November 11th? Probably. Had you met other members of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, let's say during at that time or of those news conferences? You would see them, just say hello. I don't know if I was on a first name basis with any of them or any given name or given my name. That included Detective Mark Wiegert, possibly. Okay, when did you become on first name basis with any of the members of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department? I don't think I was ever on a first name basis with any of them. Sheriff Poggle was the one that I had any sort of conversation with. All right, and on November 11th, you were having this discussion. I missed it. I don't know how many coworkers it was, or if it matters, but you were talking with them about Avery. Yes. Or the case. Tell me a little bit more about that conversation and who says what. Attorney Fallon, I'm going to ask for a little foundation as to when and where this foundation or this conversation took place. By Attorney Strang, I think you described only one. It was on November 11th, and you were at work. Am I correct? We weren't at work. You weren't at work. All right. Would it be polite to tell me where you were, even if it's not polite to ask? We were having a couple of cocktails in a bar. All right, reporters will do that. So you're having a couple of cocktails in the bar. How many coworkers? I think there were three of us that worked at the station together, but I don't remember. There might have been a couple of other people there too. We don't all just hang out together. We have other friends. You have friends. Okay, all right. That's good. Attorney String, you don't need the name of the bar foundation, do you, Mr. Fallon? Attorney Fallon. Nope. Attorney String. Thank you. Attorney String. This was the only one conversation on November 11th, if I understand you correctly. Yes. All right. So you know, I wasn't there. I don't drink cocktails, and I would have no way of knowing who said what. But how did the subject of Stephen Avery come up? I think it had been a story that we had been covering for a couple of weeks at the news conference from that day. Kind of sparked our conversation. I think it was just the first time we were all together and just kind of rehashing the day. And who had the idea that, hey, let's go try and talk to Mr. Avery? That I don't remember. Was there any discussion about, do you know whether the Calumet County Sheriff's Department would or not allow that to occur in the jail? I think someone did mention, or I mentioned, and I said, I wonder if we would be allowed to talk to him. Okay, and what was the response to that? I don't know. We'll make a phone call in the morning. All right, and that's exactly what you did. Yes. About when in the morning? I'm scheduled to be at work at 9:30, so sometime around there. All right, and you called what? The general number for the Calumet County Jail, or what? Yes. Or what did you do? And it was the person who answered the phone to whom you addressed the inquiry. Hey, can we come down there and interview Mr. Avery? Yes. All right. Do you know who that person was? I don't. Do you remember if it was a male or female? That I don't remember. And if I understood you, you said on direct examination that the person said something like, I don't know, we'll ask? Yes. Were you put on hold or was the phone put down in any event? Yes. All right. And how much time passed before a voice came back on the jail end of the telephone? A minute or two, not very long. At most 2 minutes? Probably. I'm really not 100% sure. Okay, but a short time. Yes. I was on hold for half an hour or anything like that. All right. And it was the same person, if you recognize the voice, who came back. That I don't remember. I'm assuming it was the same person, or at the time I assumed. I don't know for sure. Okay, whether it was someone new or the same person. Right. And that person said, as best as you can recall, what? He agreed to do the interview. And what was left for you then to discuss with the person on the phone from the jail? I said, what do I need to do? And they said, just come down here and we'll take you into the room for the interview. Did they ask you when you were coming? I think I asked what time, and they said whenever. I said, okay, we'll leave in a few minutes. All right, so the response from them was, you can come whenever you like? Yes. And what was left for you to do then to discuss with the person on the phone from the jail? I said, what do I need to do? And they said, just come down here and we'll take you into the room for the interview. Did they ask you when you were coming? I think I asked what time, and they said whenever. I said, okay, we'll leave in a few minutes. All right. So the response was then from like, you can come down whenever you like? Yes. Did you ask, would there be a time limit on how long we could see Mr. Avery? No. And they didn't volunteer that there would be a time limit? No. In fact, there turned out not to be anyone knocking on the door saying time's up or trying to regulate the amount of time you spent? No. So you said, we'll hop in the car, we'll come down, I can show you the Sun registry if you want, but if I suggest to you that at least what you wrote signing in was 11:15 in the morning on Saturday, November 12th, does that sound about right? I guess, yeah, it was in the morning. It was in the morning. I believe you. on the sign-in sheet. Okay, you're welcome to see it if you want. That's probably about right. About 11:15 in the morning. All right. Did you have any conversations with anyone from law enforcement? By that, I would include the district attorney's office, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, certainly the Calumet County Jail, or any other law enforcement agency before you arrived at the jail just before 11:15. Nothing other than the phone call to the jail. All right. You came down with one cameraman? Yes. Now, your purpose in interviewing Mr. Avery was to ask him about the events that you had seen discussed on the news conference? Yes. Ask him in general about the Halbach disappearance and charges arising from her disappearance? Yes. You had no other reason to want to interview Mr. Avery? No. You weren't interested in his opinions on other topics? No. Didn't regard him as newsworthy on November 12, 2005, other than for his connection to the charges that then had been filed against him and the events surrounding Teresa Halbach's disappearance? Correct. Did you explain to the person who answered the phone in the jail when you called shortly after 9:30 that you wanted to talk to Mr. Avery about the Halbach case or the charges against him? Yes. How many times have you been in the Calumet County Jail total? Once, in the jail. All right. And how many times in the Calumet County Sheriff's Department total? Once in the Sheriff's Department. Are we talking about the same time, November 12th? No. No. Separate times? Yes. All right. And the Sheriff's Department was when? That I don't recall. Before or after the November 12th televised interview of Mr. Avery? It was before. And that was to see whom? Sheriff Poggle. To interview him or for some other purpose? For a different, to interview him for a different story in the county. Unrelated to, unrelated to the Avery, to Teresa Halbach? Yes, unrelated to that. Completely unrelated. Okay, and in fact, do you recall, was that with the interview with Sheriff Poggle, before you were aware that Ms. Halbach had been reported missing? Well before, I believe, yes. Okay, so I mean, it couldn't have been before August of 2005. Correct. But late summer, fall, before Ms. Halbach disappears. Yes. All right. I'm actually going there because I'm going to try and ask you about the jail layout. And if you have only been there once, it would be fair if you don't recall. But let me ask, okay? There's a heavy metal security door to the left of the bulletproof window where you first see the jail receptionist. Do you recall that? I don't remember the door to the left. I believe we went into the door to the right. To the right. Okay. Do you have to be buzzed in? Yes. A security door. All right. Then when do you remember where you were signed the book, where you wrote your name and the time at the date? Outside of the window before we were escorted into the jail area, before you were within the secure area, we walked in the door and the window's right there. That's where we signed in. Oh, okay. And then you think you went into a door to the right, and now you are in the secure area of the jail. I believe so, yes. All right. The small room that you described doing, in which you did the interview, is that sort of the first room on the left in the hallway? Yes. I don't know if it's the first room, but it was at the beginning of that hallway. When you went when you went in to get the interview room and you went through that first secure door, did you go through an area that had some desks, people sitting out, and some officers against the back? No, I don't remember that at all. You just went straight into the hallway. Into a hallway. All right. And the room you think was the first one on the left? It was on the left. I don't know if it was the first room. Okay, fair enough. You're aware of a deputy posted outside each door while you were in the room? Yes. You could see them through the windows on the doors. I could see the one because the door was behind me. So I don't have eyes in the back of my head, but I could see the one. How did you know that there was somebody standing behind you behind the door? The deputy that walked us in and there said that there would be a deputy at each door. All right. And the deputies were uniformed? Yes. They were standing immediately at the door. The one that I couldn't see was right there at the door, a little bit away from the door. Looking in or watching? That I don't know. My eyes weren't focused on the deputy while I was in there. Right, but you were able to see him yourself? Yes. So it follows that he could see you? Yes. All right, you conducted the interview? Yes. With Mr. Avery, 20 or 30 minutes, correct? Yes. Setting aside small talk, I'm Emily Matesic. Nice to meet you, that kind of stuff. The entirety of the interview was committed to Teresa Halbach and the charges against Mr. Avery. Yes. You did not go into other topics areas with Mr. Avery? No. Did you buzz to ask that the deputy come in at the end of the interview, or did the deputy simply let himself or herself in as the interview appeared to be wrapping up? Before the interview started, the deputy said, when you're done or you need us at any time, just raise your hand, and when we were done, I raised my hand. Okay, and obviously again, the one of them was, at least one was positioned where you could see you raise your hand. Yes, and they came, correct? Yes. They took Mr. Avery? Yes. And then you and your cameraman were escorted out? Yes. Did you talk to anyone from Calumet County Sheriff's Department before leaving the property to return to Green Bay? Nothing, other than thank you and goodbye. Did you make arrangements at any point, at any time, to provide a videotape or a DVD or anything in the interview to anyone from law enforcement? No. Were you asked to bring the videotape today? Yes. By whom? By Mr. Fallon. Okay, and were you able to accommodate Mr. Fallon's request? I referred him to my news director. It's not the one that makes those decisions. I'm not the one that makes those decisions. Sure, but in any event, you were given the tape to bring today by someone at W Bay. A tape only of the stories that aired from my interview, not the complete interview itself. So you're aware that of that little dispute that's ongoing with the raw footage versus the aired footage? Yes. Okay, what's on the raw footage that is not on the aired footage? The entire interview is on the raw footage. The tape I brought today has only stories that I did containing a little bits of the interview. But again, just to be very clear about this, if we could see the raw footage, all the film that your cameraman shot in that room, other than the true small talk, the entire discussion would have been about Teresa Halbach or the allegations in the original criminal complaint against Mr. Avery. Yes. You referred as well to a second interview with Mr. Avery that occurred over the telephone. Yes. Do you remember about when that was? I believe it was in December. How did that come to be? The interview, I sent a fax to Calumet County Jail requesting an interview. To whom did you address the fax? To Stephen Avery. Attorney Fallon, object to the line of inquiry being irrelevant based on the pleadings and focus. If we're concerned solely on the camera interview as opposed to initiated phone call conversations, that was my understanding as to our limited focus today, so it seems to me that this would be irrelevant. Attorney Strang, well, it's fair to point, but as I understand the scope of our motion and intend to scope of our motion, with Your Honor, I'm not seeking to suppress or exclude any statement to the media representatives that Mr. Avery initiated. Now, I was not aware of this telephonic interview with Ms. Matesic, and to the extent that she initiated it, it is within the intended scope of this motion. I certainly could replead the motion, but the division line here is if he initiated it. I don't see it as being subject to the Sixth Amendment claim if someone else did. The court, I'm not sure I have a copy of that motion handy. It was filed on June 16th. It's a motion. Do you have a copy of the motion handy? Attorney Strang, I do. I don't want to suggest that I addressed this because I didn't. I didn't know about this particular one. Attorney Kratz, here you go. The court. So, Mr. Fallon, your objection relates to the description of the person interviews. Attorney Fallon, it is my understanding that this was the focus. Otherwise, I would have gone into a little more questioning on my direct examination of the witness relative to the telephone interviews occurring a couple of weeks after the interview at issue here. As I understand it from the pleading, it says on page 2, Mr. Avery does not seek suppression of statements he made in telephone calls that he placed from the jail to members of the news media. So this motion addresses only the in-person interviews with the media in the jail. So that's my basis for my objection. The court, you seem to be talking about a third category here, and that's not an in-person interview at the jail, but also not a telephone call that was originated by the defendant. Attorney String, right. And I have no objection to breaking my crossing and allowing a resumption of direct. I mean, that's a fair point. I'm learning here for the first time as she initiated it. The court, you can have this back. Why don't you finish your cross and I'll let Mr. Fallon on redirect start from scratch if he wishes here. Attorney Fallon, that's fine. I suspect on further cross-examination by counsel, the issue may disappear or become far more ripe for argument. Go ahead. The court, you may proceed, Mr. String. Attorney String, you faxed a letter or something to the jail and addressed to Stephen Avery. Yes. Did you follow that with a phone call to the jail? I believe I placed a phone call first, and then I was told I couldn't make a request over the phone, so I sent a fax. You made the request cover on the phone November 12th. Yes. The answer, though, was different this time. Yes. Were you given an explanation to why the answer had changed? No. Were you ever told that Mr. Avery had written out a statement saying he did not want to be interviewed in jail by members of the media, including TV reporters? No. Nobody at the jail ever told you that? No. What did they tell you after saying, no, you can't make this request over the phone? That it needed to be in writing. All right. And did they tell you to whom to address the writing? To him, I believe. I'm not sure. Okay, that's fine. If you don't remember, do you have that letter or fax? I don't. No. What happened to it? I threw it out. Did anybody, explain to you how a fax would get to Mr. Avery in the jail? No. But they gave you the fax number. I believe I asked for the fax number. And you were given the fax number? Yes. All right. And off you sent this fax? Yes. Was it a letter to Mr. Avery? Is that your best recollection? Yes, just a short letter. What did you next hear from either Mr. Avery or someone at the Calumet County Jail? Mr. Avery called me. When did he call you? Shortly after the fax was sent. All right. And was that a collect call? Yes. You have provided your telephone number and the fax? Yes. It had invited him to call collect? Yes. Did you tell him in the letter what it was you wanted to talk about? I don't recall. Okay, that's fine. You do recall that in your mind, again, the topic of interest as to Mr. Avery was to discuss charges against him relating to the disappearance and death of Teresa Halbach. Yes. You weren't interested in this opinion of what was going to happen to the NASDAQ in 2006 or anything like that? No. All right. The interview lasted about how long? Probably about 20 minutes. Did you tape it? Yes. Did you know at the time that the jail would be taping you as receiving an outgoing call from the jail? No. When did you first learn that you were on tape on the jail end and you were talking to an inmate of the jail? I think during the course of the interview there was a recording or something that comes up on the phone that I think says something like, I don't remember what, but at that point I guess it was when I kind of realized that we were probably being taped. Right. It's a tape that says something like, this call was placed by an inmate from the Calumet County Jail, something to that effect. I will have to take your word for it. I don't really remember. But some voice. Yes. On what you took to be a taped message. Yes. Did you hear it, did you hear it more than once? Yes. So on some cycle, this voice comes over the line. Yes. All right. And you assumed that at that point that you were being taped. Yes. You had no objection to that? No. Because you were also taping on your end. Correct. And the point was to get all this on tape. Right. Was that interview then broadcast or aired? Parts of the interview and stories that I had written. So that one, again, you sort of chopped or edited and assembled into a story rather than running the raw interview tape. Yes. Look, I don't want to get off track here, but I'm curious because I just don't know. Does any of the two interviews that we're talking about, would segments of those have run on WBay website if you know? No. Attorney Fallon, objection, relevance, and I will renew my previous objection. It's clear that Mr. Avery initiated the phone contact, so this is a matter is not subject of the motion unless counsel is amending that motion. The court, well, in a sense, he initiated it in that he made the call, but it also was in response to a fax that was sent by the witness. So I'm going to give the defense some latitude here. I will overrule that part of the objection. Attorney Fallon, just for the record, the basis of my motion on that case is called State versus Pischke, Pischke, regarding initiation. And I think the argument can be made, although the case is not directly on point, that Mr. Avery was the one who initiated the contact here. So just for the record, the court, all right, let me make sure if my ruling is understood here. I'm not saying that the manner in which the defendant returned the call doesn't have some legal significance as to the substantive portion of the motion. I'm just saying for evidentiary purposes, I'm going to allow the questioning. Attorney Fallon, very well, thank you. By Attorney Strain. But there was another objection to that, and that was what was the website runs. And I don't even know if you know the answer to my question. I believe the only thing that would have run on the website was my story that aired on our station. But that may have been on the website both times? Entire interviews? No, the stories. The stories, yes. Okay. Was there any other attempts by you to interview Mr. Avery since he's been in custody? One other time, I believe, yes. When was that? I think it was in March. You initiated that with a fax? With a phone call to the jail at first. I was told it needed to be in writing, and I asked if I could send a fax, and it was no, it had to come through the mail. Oh, the request had to be, so it changed again. Yes. So this time you couldn't fax it. Did you mail a request? No. Why? It would take her day or so for the letter to get there, and by that time it wouldn't be very timely. I see. And you didn't hear then from Mr. Avery at any other time after this December telephonic interview that you described? No. You are aware that no other attempts by him to call you collect? No. Are you aware of no other attempts to call him by him to call anyone at WBay TV? Collect? No. Attorney String, that's all I have. Thank you. The court, Mr. Fallon. Attorney Fallon, yes. Just complete the record. Exhibits 4, 5, and 6 marked for identification. Attorney Fallon, may I approach? The court, yes. Direct examination by Attorney Fallon. Ms. Matesic, I show you what's been marked for identification purposes as exhibits 4, 5, and 6. Can you take a moment and look at those and tell me what they are? These are the scripts from the stories I did with telephone interviews of Mr. Avery. All right, and these are the scripts relative to the telephone interviews that were subject of the counsel's cross-examination a few moments ago. Yes. And these are outtakes or broadcast comments and not the entire substance of the interview. Is that correct? Correct. Attorney String, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. You said these are outtakes, not the substance of the... Attorney Fallon, not the entire interview. These are what was broadcast. Attorney String, so they are not outtakes. The witness, they were taken out of the interview, bites that were taken out of the interview. Attorney Fallon, okay, choice of words. The Attorney Fallon. And as you know, these are true and accurate reflections of what was actually broadcast relative to these telephone interviews. Yes. Okay, thank you. Attorney Fallon, we would move that to introduction of exhibits 4, 5, and 6. For the record, it's marked by duration. Apparently, 133 is exhibit number 4, duration 137 is exhibit number 5, and duration 157 is exhibit 6. And I don't believe there will be an objection from counsel. Attorney Strang, no, these can be admitted, Your Honor. The court, all right, these exhibits are admitted. Attorney Fallon, that's all I have for this witness. I'm not going to do any redirect. The court, all right, the witness is excused.